All right. So I am going to share today how AIM, which stands for the Accelerative Integrated Methodology, really rapidly develops proficiency. Now, AIM started in a core French classroom in Ontario, but now is used in many immersion classrooms, bilingual programs. I taught it in immersion and bilingual situation, as well as in intensive French sometimes, and also it is used in Francophone districts to help with francisation programs, and in different parts of the world for Mandarin, Japanese, Spanish, and teaching English as well. So I'd be interested in knowing what grades and languages you intend to teach. So we'll just take a little survey here, which sort of hard to see all of you, but hopefully I'll be able to tell. How many of you are intending to teach core or French FSL, the basic French? Hands up. Okay, so I think that's probably most of you. Any of you are intending to teach immersion or bilingual program or intensive type of instruction? Okay. And any of you interested in teaching? Oh, pardon me?
There were a couple of hands.
A couple. Okay, great. And how about the grade levels? Primary, elementary? And junior high, secondary? Okay, great, interesting. And then anyone interested in teaching another language like ESL, EAL, English is another language, or Spanish? Anyone? Mandarin? Japanese? Okay. I don't think I saw any hands there. It was kind of hard to tell. So Alexander, you can let me know, but I don't think so.
No, none of those, just Spanish.
Spanish. Okay, lovely. So I do have some samples. I do ask because I want to make sure I'm, meeting the needs of the group here. So I do have some Spanish samples. I'll share a few of those, but not the others. So AIM began as a result of my realization that the students in my classes weren't learning anything. I initially started my career as a French immersion teacher. That's a startup, kindergarten, grade 1. And, after a while, the kids were understanding me all right and beginning to speak. So, I was happy enough. I was very passionate about French. I'd just been living in Quebec for a few years. I continue to be passionate about French and teaching French. But then I moved into core French or FSL in Toronto. And that's where there was a program, 30 minutes a day, every day. The kids would have French, but just 30 minutes a day. And so I was given classes from junior kindergarten, age 4, right through to grade 5. And I thought before I started working at the school, oh my goodness, the grade 5s, 7 in their 7th year of French, they're going to be so good. They're going to be speaking so well. And I was shocked. The grade 5s could not understand when I spoke. They couldn't speak to me when I wanted them to speak to me in French. They couldn't read well. They couldn't write a sentence, much less a story. And I thought, this is unbelievable. 7 years of French language instruction. They can't even say a sentence. This is just terrible. Because I, as a French teacher, had learned French in a traditional manner and, this is before going to Quebec at all. I just learned it at North Toronto Collegiate in Toronto, and I had done well, and I was feeling pretty confident in French. And later on, I spoke to a professor at a university who said, well, there actually is very little proficiency in core French. And some of the studies have shown that only about 4% of the population actually learn French through a traditional or even thematic or even what we call communicative approach. Not many students are actually learning French very well. And unfortunately, a lot of that 4% who do learn French well end up being French teachers. And then we think, well, we'll just teach the way we learn. Well, unfortunately, a lot of students aren't learning very well. So that was my situation. The students were in a perfect context for learning a language. It was a private school, and the parents were supportive. The students were average to above average academically. It couldn't be better, and yet no one was learning anything. So I decided to help my students actually learn something in the language classroom. So what I'm going to show you now are just very quick excerpts of aspects of the methodology in different classes all over the world in different languages. Just a little taste.
Now, everyone will do the song
Non, ta grand-mère. Parce que c'est la grand-mère de Chaperon Rouge et la mère par Chaperon Rouge. Alors c'est ta grand-mère.
To the monde est fantastique.
La classe toma. Yo tomo.
Una persona importante o importante, importante. Importante, entonces yo no hablo con tú, okay.
Contigo.
Oh, sí.
我要找一个歌手，小鸡住在农场里，一天小鸡出上学，一个小国家在小鸡的桌上。怎么了？哎呀，天塌了，天塌了！怎么了？你去哪里？天塌了，天塌吗？
So the kids in AIM classrooms are pretty engaged. They are very active. It's a very active learning approach. We want students, it's very much based on the research on the brain and how it works and how we can keep the brain active and alert. So the main goal of this methodology is to promote proficiency. And I'm so happy to know that the CEFR, which now forms the basis or influences greatly the curriculum guidelines all over Canada, the United States, ACTFL, all over the world actually, focusing on the can-do statements, making sure that students are gaining proficiency rapidly. So, and that's what AIM has always been about. So AIM is a comprehensible input-based approach. We want students to understand as rapidly as possible. We have a content and language integrated learning focus with a goal to develop authentic proficiency. So we use a lot of techniques, and I'm going to talk a lot about the gesture approach today, but also about other things as well. AIM, what AIM does is it is a quick start. And the most successful aspect of AIM is that it quickly gets students up and running in the language, getting a foundation for proficiency so that we can build on it. I think that one thing that happens with a lot of students through high school or whatever context they're learning languages in, they spend numerous years without developing any foundation for proficiency. And of course, if you're in junior high or high school and you have, 3-4 years of French and you haven't really learned how to communicate, that can be very frustrating. And it can make one feel that, the language course isn't very meaningful. So we want to get students really developing that proficiency quickly so they can realize that it is possible to learn a language, that they're gaining success. So AIM is not tied to a specific curriculum, but I have linked AIM to other many curriculum documents around the world, which I'm happy to share, and you can find them on the website. It is multidisciplinary, as I mentioned. As a former French immersion teacher, I decided that it's really, well, I realized that it's so beneficial to teach a language through another subject area. And because I just have a limited time I had a limited time in core French, I decided to use an arts and literacy based approach to teach language. So my area, content area, is the development of literacy through drama as well, and singing and dancing, which a lot of language teachers do anyway. There's a lot of research on the brain that supports what we're doing with AIM, and certainly it meets the needs of various different learners. AIM, as I mentioned, is used all over the world. So primarily in Canada, in many different provinces, especially Alberta. It's used widely in the Edmonton Public School District, Calgary as well, Red Deer. So yes, a lot of schools and administrators are very supportive of AIM in your province. We have AIM in various other countries, as you can see there, a lot in the United States and Australia and the Netherlands, and to a lesser degree in other countries as well. So there was a recent study out of the Netherlands where students in AIM classes were shown to outperform students in other programs in all language skills, and the same research was voted the best research paper of the year in the Journal of European Second Language Acquisition. And you can also find that on our website as well. So just some information about how AIM is doing in the world. So now, back to what AIM is. AIM's key components include the gesture approach, pared down language, as I mentioned, the use of story, theater, music, drama, basically working on a literacy and arts-based approach, language manipulation activities, and of course, we want students to transfer to spontaneous communication and not many days, weeks, months, or years later. We want them to do this within the first few days, begin to speak spontaneously in the language. So I'm going to go over these key components, and we'll practice a little bit of the gestures as well. And if we have time at the end, I'll do a little demonstration class with the use of the gestures. But I think it is important to see AIM, the big picture of AIM, so you see how the gestures fit in to this methodology. So let's start with the gestures. So first of all, the way that we use gestures is fairly unique. Of course, most language teachers are going to use gestures in some way or another to support students' understanding, but AIM sort of takes it to a whole other level. The gestures that when we are gesturing for this to the students, for example, if I say bonjour, tout le monde vient ici, I'm speaking as I'm gesturing when I'm initially demonstrating those words. But my main goal is to stop speaking and instead simply gesture only for the students to then say the word on my behalf. So basically the students are speaking for me. And what this allows us to do is to have the students simultaneously see the word, hear the word, because they're hearing their other students in the class saying it, say the word themselves. And sometimes we invite the students to also do the gesture. So they're kinesthetically embedding. So what's happening is the students are embedding the word and its meaning in different parts of the brain simultaneously. And when this happens, this information about the word is stored, because it's stored in different parts of the brain, it is easier to recall. And we find that the recall of students in AIM, where classes use AIM, is pretty impressive. They're remembering words extremely well. Now, that's not the only thing that we're doing. We're helping students maximize practice with the language. So as I'm gesturing, maintenant, la classe commence et tout le monde dit bonjour. So I'm gesturing that. The kids are saying it. And so the students are seeing and feeling and hearing and understanding the syntax of the language. And they're also coming to understand grammar as well. So for example, I might gesture, il est grand, elle est grande. Because in French, of course, you have to add that additional sound to the feminine form of the adjective, and that's associated with the elle feminine gesture. So we're linking kinesthetically, visually, auditorily, the way the language works through the gestures. We also have other aspects of grammar that we embed in our gesture. So we have il marche, il va marcher, elle voit, elle veut voir. Ah, another R. Tu Fini, tu dois finir. So we have the voir, the ir, the re as well. Je comprends, je veux, ou je peux comprendre. So every infinitive form has an R somewhere in it. And so that little gesture signals to the students to add that additional sound, which is either a, ir, voir, or re, and so on. So we are helping students not only understand the words and the meanings through the gestures, because most of them are very natural or iconic, like écoute, regarde, veut, doit, aime, and so on. But also we are helping the students to use the language extensively before they even can speak on their own. We are, as AIM teachers, are guiding them through language production before they can even say a simple sentence independently. So this helps them really develop confidence and accent and just makes them feel very comfortable in the language. And the transition to their own proficiency is very easy and fairly quick. Yeah, so those are some of the aspects of the gesture approach. Now, that gesture approach threads throughout every aspect of the methodology, which is AIM. So let's have a quick look at the different types of classes we might encounter. First of all, let's have a look at a class that is not using AIM, but is target language only, which AIM is as well. We're very much an immersive approach. Doesn't matter whether it's 30 minutes 3 times a week or less, which I have usually 1 hour once a week, or every day 30 minutes or 40 minutes, or bilingual or immersion or francisation programs. AIM is always the same. AIM is an immersion approach where we use target language only, no matter how long the class is. So here's an example of a class that is not being taught with AIM, but still teacher remaining in the target language.
Aujourd'hui, je suis très excitée parce que la semaine prochaine, je vais visiter mon ami qui habite à Winnipeg. C'est vrai, je suis née à Winnipeg et toute ma famille habite à Winnipeg. J'ai 2 sœurs et j'ai ma maman et mon papa qui habitent là. Alors...
Okay, so that's lovely. She's sharing something about her family and that she's going to Winnipeg and connecting with the kids and using the target language only. And the kids are listening. We don't know if they're understanding. So there are some nice elements to that, but that is not what an AIM classroom looks like. This is instead what it looks like.
Habite à Winnipeg.
Pardon?
Winnipeg.
Excellent.
Alors, je vais
Continuez
maintenant. Est-ce que tout le monde sait ou ne sait pas que je suis né à Winnipeg? Je sais. C'est vrai. Je suis né là-bas. Et j'ai aussi des amis que je peux visiter là-bas aussi.
Okay, so we can see that the teacher is guiding the students through the language. No, she's only using the gestures that she's introduced to date to the kids, so the kids are confident. They're getting that practice with the language. If they don't pronounce things loud enough or say things correctly, then she will keep repeating, as she did here, with the word j'ai and so on. So we'll go over, I think I'll show you a Spanish one a little bit later. Actually, you know what? I will show you that little Spanish clip because it's pretty short. So the teacher uses the gestures to just talk about himself or herself, just spontaneously, to explain the beginning of an activity as that teacher did, to talk about something that just happens in the classroom. Oh non, le crayon tombe ici. Je prends le crayon. Whatever is going on, whatever the teacher wants to communicate to the students, he or she uses the gestures as a way to authentically provide practice with the language to the students. Now, you might ask, what are those words we are gesturing? Well, it's a very important aspect of the methodology that where the methodology would not work if this was not included, and that is the pared down language. Pared down language just means that there's a huge amount of vocabulary in any language, of course. You know, dictionaries are this thick. What words do we choose to teach our students? I think this is very important, especially in the limited time we have with them. Even in immersion programs, they're not 24 hours a day in French. It's a limited time. So we need to very carefully select the words that we want to introduce to our kids and keep a focus on those words, because basically my philosophy is less is more. If we give them too much, they're going to be lost. If we pare it down to what the essential components of the methodology of the language that they need to know are, then that's going to really help them. And the AIM is all about helping students be successful very, very early. So the pared down language, the words of the pared down language are what we gesture. It really simplifies the language. It helps students rapidly understand, and it allows us, because there is a selected number of words for the students to learn, it allows us to repeat those words enough for them to acquire them. If we don't repeat words often enough for the students, they will not acquire them quickly, or perhaps not at all. And so again, that comes back to the less is more. So how do we simplify the language for the children, or students of any age, even more? Well, first of all, AIM is very verb-centered. I used to teach with a thematic approach, lists of nouns. Okay, I'm going to teach sports for these few weeks, and I'm going to teach words related to clothing for these few weeks. Then I'm going to move on to words related to animals for these few weeks. And it just never worked, because after getting to animals, I never talked about sports or clothing until maybe next year when I did another theme on that, and the students wouldn't remember. There wasn't enough repetition. AIM is very holarchical. So once I introduce a word, we'll repeat it. I'll add more words, and I'll repeat the words I've already introduced. Add more words and repeat everything I introduced. Keep adding and keep going back and repeating. So that is how we ensure this pleasant repetition. AIM is not noun-centered. I teach a lot of nouns, but it is instead very verb-centered, very verb-rich. So it's very much unlike a thematic approach that focuses a lot on nouns. I think verbs are essential for language acquisition. I think we are moving, being, active humans that are always doing something. And so when we're describing things or talking about things, we need a lot of verbs. Now you might say, well, what about the verbs that are really hard to conjugate, like pouvoir and vouloir and devoir? Those are really high frequency, and we need to have students learn them in the very first few days. In older curriculum guidelines, sometimes it wasn't recommended that we introduce those verbs until the 3rd or the 5th year because they were difficult to conjugate. Well, my goodness, a young child in a francophone country will learn veut and peut and doit right in the first little bit. They're some of the first few words they learn. So how do we make it simple? Well, what I've done is I've regularized the stem of the verb. So we do just teach veut, peut, doit, sais, as in je sais, regarde, écoute, prends, donne, écrit. And we can use that form, that regularized stem of the verb with je, and I'll just choose one word to show you. So, je veux, tu veux, il veut, elle veut, on veut, tout le monde veut, la classe veut. So instead of nous and vous with the change to the pou and the on and the ez, the pouvait and the pouvant, no, let's just stick with peu or veut or doit, or whatever word we're saying, and not worry about those changes and use on, la classe, and tout le monde to start. Later on, we'll introduce nous and vous once they develop a little bit of proficiency with the language, but let's make it simple. Let's get them speaking correctly, not nous peut or vous veut. We don't want anything, we want to keep it as correct as possible so they can use tout le monde, la classe, and on. Very high frequency words are part of the pared down language. What is the vocabulary they really need to know in order to communicate quickly and early in the language, and cognates as well. So what we're doing with the use of gestures and the pared down language is we're flipping the typical linguistic power structure. What is that? Well, who has the most power in a language classroom? It's the teacher, right? Because the teacher has all of the language. Even if they don't speak very well in the target language, they still have more language than the students in the class. So they're the powerful ones, the ones with the language. And the students are down here. They do not have a lot of power. They can't speak at all, or they don't speak well. So what happens in an AIM classroom with the use of gestures is the teacher must now adjust his or her words to reflect the student's knowledge. So, because we want to make it comprehensible. So you're going to learn these gestures the first day and teach those words and gestures to your kids. And then you're going to learn a few more gestures and words for the next day and teach those words to your kids and review everything you did the first day. And then add more words and gestures, teach those to your kids, and review what you did the first, second, and third day. And you keep doing that, and this allows for that repetition, allows for the comprehensible input to happen, and really respecting where your students are at any given time in the language acquisition process. You know exactly what you've introduced to your kids, and they know exactly what you have introduced as well, because they're identifying the gestures with you. Now, along with the gestures and with the use of the gestures, I'm also creating a context that is, or an environment, a deeply context embedded environment for those words of the pared down language, so the students can engage with them and use them in a meaningful way. When I was at the University of Toronto in OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, I worked a lot in my undergraduate, Bachelor of Education, and my Master of Arts degree with David Booth. And he was a English first language expert in literacy through drama. And he believed that the best literacy approaches are not where a teacher tries to do as many stories as possible, but rather the teacher focuses on one story, and his terminology was to go in, out, and around the story. So delving deeply into one story and really coming to know it, and having the students act it out and retell it and talk about it and describe images from the story and extend the story and sing about the story and dance about the story is the best way to develop literacy. And I feel that in a second language or a foreign language environment, it is even more appropriate to use something like this approach to teach a language, because it brings to the students a level of security and predictability. Over a 50-hour kit, we're working in and out on one story, and the kids become so familiar with it that they develop a confidence, and there's a predictability and a sense of security, which we want to find in or promote in a language classroom, because as a researcher once said, named Krashen, there's an effective filter that can come up, which is a fear and anxiety in a foreign language classroom environments or second language environment. And this is a quote from David Booth. He said, "Children new to a language find in a context story for understanding. It's not word lists that command their attention, but the lives of characters that fill the tales they read or listen to, and how painful it must be for those children alien to a language to sit day after day without feeling connected to what's happening in the classroom," which is what I experienced when my students did not have AIM and I was using a thematic approach. They just were not connected to the language. And David Booth says, and yet through storying, how quickly they enter the activity, making sense of what is happening, building their own versions, listening, telling, retelling, talking about, reflecting upon, responding. And I really think that summarizes a lot of what we see in AIM. So, because most of you are in French, let's have a look at a part of a French story here.
Le guépard arrive à la maison du lion. Il parle avec lui.
Monsieur Lion, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Il ne pleut pas depuis longtemps. Tout le monde a très soif. C'est un gros problème. Est-ce que tu peux nous aider?
D'accord, guépard. Tu dois aller à l'arbre Ungali, un arbre magique qui est loin d'ici dans la forêt. Tu dois dire le nom de l'arbre et après ça, l'arbre peut aider les animaux. Dis à l'arbre que tout le monde a soif parce qu'il n'y a pas d'eau. N'oublie pas, c'est l'arbre Ungali.
Oh, merci, Monsieur Lion. Merci. Je cours à l'arbre maintenant. Au revoir.
Okay, so that's just a very short excerpt of one of the stories that we have, and they become theater pieces, so the students can act them out. They usually take 10 to 15 minutes to act. They're not just simple little dialogues. They are full-length drama pieces, les pièces de théâtre. And so that's why we work over a longer period of time with this story that the students come to know well. I'm happy to, if you're interested in seeing some examples of the Spanish or other languages, I'm happy to send those along to you if you'd like, but we do have a limited time today, so I think I'll focus mostly on the French. Now, that was a story that we would use with grade 3 or 4. We have entry-level points for AIM at kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, another different story for 4, 5, and 6, another different story for 6, 7, and 8, and another different entry-level story for grade 9, 10, and even an adult story as well. So this is an example of one of the raps that we have, and I'll just explain the purpose of it in a moment for high school.
La classe commence et tout le monde est prêt. On doit parler seulement en français. Mais si quelqu'un parle en anglais, cette personne n'a pas de carte et ça c'est vrai. Ça c'est dommage, mais on espère aussi que tout le monde décide d'aider ses amis. En français, on parle tellement bien. Notre rap est terminé, oui c'est la fin.
So you'll notice that in that rap, we're talking about our commitment to using the target language only. And every day we start with something. It could be the rap, and there are many different raps like this that are different words, but basically say the same thing. We are committing to using the target language only. We're here to help each other. And then I bookend the class with a commitment to use the target language only, and then an acknowledgement that the students actually did. And a lot of this information is found in our trainings and our full 2-day trainings, of course. Here's another song, again for elementary school. So so every play or story that is dramatized for students in primary and elementary also has an associated choreographed dance. So the students are not only moving their hands or speaking with the support of the gestures when talking about the story or answering questions based on the story or doing activities based on the story, but they're also moving their full bodies in response kinesthetically to the story as they dance to many different songs. There are usually 1 or 2 at least choreographed dances for each story based on a song, but also a lot of different raps, like that entry rap that you just saw. There are other different raps that sort of segue from an activity to another, describe an activity or describe a routine that we're doing in the class. And so the students are constantly singing, there's rhythm, there's rhyme, there's movement to the language of the pared down language that they're repeating over and over and over and over again in different contexts. So now we've got this story that the students come to know very, very well. So we don't just want, to toss a script at the kids and say, here, learn this and memorize it and go off and perform the dance, the story. That would not be very useful, and it would not develop proficiency. The key to the development of proficiency is taking that story that they've come to know very well and then helping them learn to manipulate the language of it independently. So I've developed a series of very scaffolded, meaning sort of you start very simply, then get more and more and more difficult as students move up through the different activities. These scaffolded language manipulation activities allow me to help students with great confidence start to manipulate the language independently. So we start with something based on the story that's very simple, and then eventually the students, as you can see in this second picture here, they are writing their own stories, and this can happen even by the end of the very first kit. So our main goal is that we want to transfer their students' knowledge of the language to their spontaneous use of the language when speaking, and of course in their creative writing. There's a variety of different individuals, teachers, consultants. This is a professor at a university in New Hampshire who used AIM actually to teach English as a second language to adults with our ESL kit. So let's hear from a few professors, some of whom you might recognize in some of your studies. So we'll see. We'll see.
If I had to choose, one thing that distinguishes AIM classrooms from more typical core French classrooms, it's the level of emotional investment that kids have in the process and the fun that they're having. And again, that's fuel that drives the learning process.
So they're very keen and they can apply. I guess the most remarkable point is that they can apply everything or a lot of what they've learned in a context, in everyday life context.
And what we didn't anticipate would happen was that students in grade 4 with a sibling that it was in grade 7 were going home at night and actually speaking French in sentences at the dinner table. And the feedback was very impressive from the parents that all of a sudden their kids were having conversations that they couldn't follow in French at the dinner table.
If I had to choose,
So, yeah, it's really nice that students are taking French out of the classroom. It means they're making the language part of who they are and using it, not just in the classroom context, which is lovely to see. I think I'm going to just move on just a little bit here. I'm going to show you an example of some of the students working together, writing as they develop their oral language skills. So the way AIM works is we don't have the students just do those language manipulation activities that I mentioned in silence. From the moment a child enters, or an adult, whoever it is, enters an AIM classroom, they're speaking almost the entire time. When they're working with the whole class and the teacher's sort of in front of the class and gesturing for the students to speak, as you saw that teacher talking about her trip to Winnipeg, the students are speaking that whole class time where the teacher is sort of conducting the class like a choir. But 1/3 to 1/2 of the class time is where the students are working at desks as well and working on those language manipulation activities that the teacher has modeled during the whole class time. But they're not sitting in silence writing those activities. We want to ensure that students are continuing to develop their oral skills in tandem with the written skills. So let's have a look at what that looks like.
Oui. Il faut te mettre en salle et déchirer.
Est-ce que ça, c'est la même histoire, mais dans les mots différents?
Oh oui.
Dans les mots différents?
Qu'est-ce qu'on peut
Mais
faire? On peut
est-ce
faire
que tu fais en partenaire ou
Saute.
beaucoup? Est-ce que tu fais
très pauvre.
Est-ce que tu fais ça?
Est-ce que c'est sans? Non, ça c'est juste
La maison. Tu fais ça?
Louis commence à marcher dans la forêt. Il espère trouver une amie dans la forêt.
Elle a quand même des chances.
En train de... Oh, excellent. En train de... En... 3 mots. En train de...
Après, il a triché avec un accent aigu. La petite chaperon rouge est partie le plus vite possible chez la grand-mère.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's important to see the divisions in an AIM classroom between the whole class activities where the teacher is gesturing everything and the students having the opportunity to write. I want to give you guys a little practice with the gestures as well. So I think I'm going to skip over a few of these things, but I would like to show you just before we do a little bit of a practice class, the fact that AIM develops oral and written proficiency equally well. One of the most difficult things I think is to develop that oral proficiency early on and quickly and well. But because AIM does that so effectively, what we see is that the transfer from the oral to the written is immediate. It's a very, very easy transfer because when we're talking about English to French, we share the same alphabet. Most of the same sounds are the same. And so that students are writing very early and very well in AIM classrooms because they are speaking very well so early in AIM classrooms. So I'm going to show you an example of some creative writing that one of my students did in grade 1 when we worked on the story called Le Chat et la Lune, which is a kit for the younger students. Now, just as a bit of an explanation, this is a story retelling. This is the first creative story that we work on with AIM students. And again, it is scaffolded. So they've done a lot of different language manipulation activities. And now this is their first creative writing, but indeed scaffolded as well, because what they have to do is retell the story in their own words, but they may not repeat any sentence that is found in the original story. So what we're training students to do is to use circumlocution, just as anyone would have to do if they're going to a country of another language and they're learning that language. They have this much vocabulary in their own language, but they have this much vocabulary in the target language. So they can only use this much vocabulary. So they have to use what they know to say what they want to say. So this activity trains the students to use the words they know, but to retell the story, not repeating the words from the original story and just saying, retelling it in their own words. So this is my grade 1 student. All of the examples that you've seen here are from core French classes, the videos so far. And this also was from a core French class. We had 30 minutes a day of French every day. And this grade 1 student, it was her first year of French, and she wrote this story about Le Chat et la Lune. And of course, she would not be writing the story if she wasn't writing something in English as well. And she has pretty good spelling and had picked up on the spelling through the different language manipulation activities we had based around the story. And of course, using words that she knew from the story to retell this story in her own words. And that's where the scaffolding occurs. Now, here's an example of a grade 11 story retelling. It's exactly the same process if you're interested for Spanish, French, English as a second language, whatever the language is, it's the same process. But for grade 11, we're going to see a much longer story, more detailed story, and better spelling, usually better punctuation, and so on. But still, errors, it's the first year of French. Back down to grade 7 retelling. Based on L'Arbre en Galie that you just saw, this teacher decided to use sort of an elementary kit for grade 7. That's okay. If a teacher loves the story, it's an African folktale. She decided to use that for her grade 7 first year French class here in British Columbia. And so this student wrote, again, a pretty nice long story, but not repeating any sentence from the original story. It had to be in her own words. And another thing that we do through this activity, this exercise, is to help students develop an understanding of what is a good story, how to edit a story, how to, what is the entire writing process, and how to write a good story, how to add detail to a story, how to embellish a story. So those are some of the elements that we work on when students do story retellings. Now, the next type of story that we work on in our literacy-based approach is story extension. And so the students, again, these students had 150 hours of instruction. So we were at the end of, toward the end of the second year of French. Well, one of these students had me just 1 year and the other had French in kindergarten. And what the students have to do here is take the story that we've been working on, for that time, that half year, and to about 1/3 through that story, they start, or let's say 2/3 to a bit more through that story. The students then write a story extension. And basically it's qu'est-ce qui se passe après? What happens next? So the story ends, the wolf, for example, here falls into the soup. Qu'est-ce qui se passe après? What does he do? He runs out and he's still hungry. So what happens? And so my grade 1 students wrote this story, and I'll read it for you because, it's a little bit difficult to read. Après que le loup sort de Les Trois Petits Cochons, il va à la maison et dort et se réveille et marche à la blase et court et marche. Monsieur Loup est très fou et content. Et le loup frappe à la porte de la fille amie. Il dit à son ami, est-ce que tu veux danser avec moi? Oui, je aime toi. L'ami dit, est-ce que tu veux aller à ma maison? Le loup dit, oui, oui, je veux. Le cochon est ici, dit le loup. Oh no, she's afraid of the cochon. J'ai peur, dit la fille amie. Elle court à sa maison. Oui, je veux aller à ma maison. Est-ce que tu veux aller à ma maison? Oui, je veux aller à ta maison, dit le loup. Je veux faire une fête. Little grade 1s, they love to do les fêtes. Dit la fille amie. Le loup dit, oui, 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 oui. As you can see, there's lots of repetition in there. The students are exposed to a lot of repetition. You can see that come through in their stories. And this is a lovely story from a grade 1 student who's had, just 150 hours maximum of French. Ça, c'est délicieux. Love that spelling over there. So what does this tell you? Can anyone does anyone have an idea as to what does this tell you about this student's proficiency? Alexandra, I don't know if you can help with any answers there. I'd love to know what you think about what are we seeing in this story that tells us about what is happening here with the student's proficiency.
It's showing their understanding. It's showing their understanding.
They understand the language, absolutely. Are they just understanding? Is this a passive activity or an active activity?
They're able to take their understanding of the spoken language and translate it into written language without necessarily writing it correctly, but writing it the way that they're speaking. If that makes sense.
Sorry, it was a little hard to hear. Alexandra, could you summarize that?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can they translate the spoken story into written. Without necessarily without necessarily correctly spelling, but at the same time they heard it, so they are able to recount it the way that they heard it.
Right. So I'm interested that you said translating. Do you think that the student in grade 1 is translating?
Oh, I think that was really just a transfer, right? Where we're necessarily translating because they probably think of it in a French way.
They are thinking in French. Thank you so much. That's exactly what's happening. The student is not thinking in English. And when you were talking about a student in grade 1, just 6 or 7 years old, they are not thinking in English and then putting it in French. They are thinking in French and they're writing it in French. This is a direct oral to written transfer. A student in grade 1 could never write a story like this if they couldn't say a story like this. So this is what's very interesting. In an AIM classroom, we're not seeing translation. We're seeing students who actually develop enough proficiency to be able to speak and write what they need to say in writing. So we have a lot of different samples of student writing in AIM, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of long, long stories. This is a story that's rather than qu'est-ce qui se passe après, it's qu'est-ce qui se passe avant, by a grade 8 student writing what a retelling, no, sorry, not a retelling, what happens leading up to the story for the kit that they're working on. We have students also do oral retellings. So what they have to do is retell the story in their own words without repeating any sentence from the original story that they've come to know very well. It has to be in their own words. They're not allowed to repeat any of that script that was the original story. So let's have a quick, just couple of minute look at what this is, because I think it's really important to see what is possible in terms of the development of proficiency.
Boucle Violette.
So this child is retelling orally the story of what we call Boucle Violette, which is Boucle d'Or, Goldilocks, but sort of a different version of it, slightly different version. And she must tell the story, but she's not repeating any sentence from this story that she learned through the game kit.
Personnage. Le narrateur, Boucle Violette, Papa Ours, Maman Ours et Bébé Ours. Un jour, il y a une fille qui s'appelle Boucle Violette. Boucle Violette marche dans la forêt. Les trois ours décident de marcher dans la forêt. Elles sont quittées la maison. Alors, Boucle Violette marche et marche. Alors, elle arrive à la maison dans la forêt. Boucle Violette veut entrer dans la maison, mais elle ne peut pas. So, elle crie. Bonjour, bonjour. Est-ce que quelqu'un est là? Je m'appelle Boucle Violette et je suis très gentille. Boucle Violette n'entend pas de la voix. Alors, elle ne peut pas ouvrir la porte. Elle ouvre la fenêtre et saute dans la maison. Et elle dit, est-ce que ça c'est la chose de manger? Oui, c'est très vrai. Et elle voit une pizza de Papa Ours, un soupe pour Maman Ours et un gros biscuit pour Bébé Ours. Boucle Violette dit, oh, j'aime manger, c'est très vrai. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a ici? Il y a une pizza, de la soupe et le gros biscuit. J'aime tout ça, très vrai. J'aime la pizza, j'aime la soupe, j'aime le gros biscuit, j'aime beaucoup de choses. Alors, Boucle Violette dit, je veux manger de la pizza, de la soupe et le gros biscuit. Alors, elle mange un peu de la pizza et elle dit, aïe, cette pizza est trop chaude.
Okay, I'll stop there. It's very long. She talks for about 15 minutes, retelling the story in her own words, just putting a phone up in her bed, you can see there. And we ask every student at the end of every kit to do that. And it tells us a lot about their proficiency and the development of their literacy skills. Can they retell a story? Can they sequence a story? Can they add detail to the story? Can they embellish a story? And can they say it with lots of expression too, you know, and add lots of other vocabulary. I can see, I mean, I know the story well, so I know she's adding lots of her own vocabulary there that isn't in the original story. And so, yeah, it's just lovely to see, because this is true proficiency. This is where a child can take and retell a story in her own words. And it all builds out through the methodology that is AIM. So just before I do a little demonstration, I would like you to listen to this excerpt of a student who's had AIM. And again, this just back to this child. She was in grade 2. This is core French, just basic French, 30 minutes a day, 4 times a week of French. This child has had French for 3 or 4 years now, and she is in grade 5. And, oh, no, that's not one, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Actually, I don't think I'm going to show you this one yet. So I think I'm going to pause here and I'll show you that video a bit later, because I want to be sure to have some time to do some practice with you with AIM, just so you can get a little taste of what it's all about. So this is how I would begin an AIM classroom. So hopefully you just join in with me, pretend you're just brand new to French, and here we go. Bonjour. Bonjour. Oh, très bien. Pardon. Bonjour. Ah, très bien. Tout le monde? Très bien. Maintenant, now, pardon? Maintenant, la classe commence, begins. La classe commence. Pardon? La classe commence. Pardon? Et tout le monde, pardon? Tout le monde ouvre. Ouvre la tête. Oh! La tête. Pardon? Et enlève. Enlève. Oh, très bien. Enlève l'anglais. Oui. Enlève l'anglais. Et put. Mets l'anglais dans. Oh, très bien. Dans la poche. Dans la poche. Et maintenant, tout le monde prend le français. Prends le français et mets le français. Oh, bien! Dans la tête. Et maintenant, tout le monde parle, bla 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 bla, parle seulement, only, seulement en français. Et pas en anglais, non. L'anglais va dans la poche. Et maintenant, tout le monde parle seulement français. Fantastique! Tout le monde parle en français. Très bien. Wow! That was fantastic, you guys. You really got it. Joined in so quickly. So as you can see, I'm setting up through the use of gestures the idea that we only speak in French, and I'm helping the students to express that by my gestures. I'm teaching them the words, teaching them to speak authentically around our commitment to using the target language only. Do you have any questions about that little demonstration that I gave there? Any questions at all or any comments at all? Yes.
Okay, so we have a question.
I wonder if you could come up to the, just so that Alexandra doesn't have to repeat because it's very hard to hear.
Hi. So the student that has a comment is deaf, so I'm the sign language interpreter. So I'll be saying what her comment is. Okay, so I just had actually a few quick questions, if you don't mind. So my first question is regarding your recent example just now with the sentence. Do you mind in English, could you say the sentence you just taught everyone in French, just so that I can put it down? Like, do you mind just repeating a full sentence in English and then I can just write that for my notes?
Of course. So you mean the gesture a full sentence?
Yes, if you don't mind, like that introduction activity, like whatever the sentence you use, like, okay, take the English out.
Oh, okay, sure, of course.
In English, if you don't mind.
Of course. Now the class begins. And let me see, I open my head. Oop. I take out, well, French, let's say. I take out. And I put French in my pocket. And I take English and I put English in my head. And now I speak only in English, English, and not in French. So that's what I would do in English, in an English class.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah, that is helpful to put my notes down. So thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Definitely looking forward to using this method in my ASL classes. So thank you. I do have other questions, but I'll hold them for later. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, question. Do you want me to? Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Skylar's coming to the computer.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes. Do you like teach them anything in English before you would do the activity you just did with us?
No, because the students don't know I speak English. It's a full immersion approach. I don't want them to know because I want them to only speak to me in English at recess or lunch duty, French. Recess, lunch duty, after school class, I do a cooking class, I do a karate, I've done a karate class. It's only in French because I represent French to them. And so
do they like learn all that just through the gestures and like images and stuff?
Yeah, they learn the words by my gesturing. And they don't gesture. The students don't gesture. Now, once in a while, I'll have them do a few gestures. I'll just say to the class, tout le monde fait les actions. Everyone do the gestures. And then I'll just run through a bunch of words. Ouvre, met, prend, tête, français. And they have to do all the gestures as I just name them, one after the other. And so I do help them to kinesthetically embed, but typically 90% of the time, I'm just gesturing and the kids are speaking. Or during 1/3 to 1/2 of the class, we're just speaking. But I always have the gestures there to support them, to extend their sentences, to correct them. If they say, je veux marche, I'll say to them, marche, you know, to correct them, or le table, and I'll say, you know, la, to show them, you know, that the correct form. Or they might say, le fille est content. Oh, la fille est content. And I'll add the gesture. So my gestures are there to help correct or to extend their sentences. But basically, they're just speaking all the time in French with my guidance or independently. Another question?
Yeah, it's a little bit related to that question. So should the student itself have like a first language foundation before they enter the AIM program? Like have any kind of language before they enter the program?
No. Well, I mean, usually we teach to students who already have some language. So usually age 4 is when we start. But to teach another language, because this is used to teach another, like there is baby sign that's used with little babies sometimes to support them and to help them to express themselves, but it's very, very simple. They're not gesturing full sentences or grammar or anything. So AIM is used to teach students who already have a language to learn another language. So typically we have kits from like age 4 and up. I hope that answers your question. I hope that I understood the question.
Yeah, no, that actually was very helpful. Thank you. I do have one other question. Okay, great. Just was writing something down. Okay, so my other question was, for the Edmonton community specifically, is there a school itself that the AIM program is connected to, or is it transferable to all the schools in the area, or does it depend?
Oh,
how does that work?
Yeah, thanks for your question. Yes, AIM is used all over the world. So if an individual teacher wants to use it, or if a school district like Edmonton has encouraged teachers to use it because they feel it's a benefit to their students. Dion LeBlanc, who is the current consultant for Edmonton Public Schools, used AIM in her classroom and she found a lot of success with it. So she's encouraging all the teachers in her board who want to use it. So I'm coming up to my 3rd training for 2 days for this year, and I've been in Edmonton every year for many years now. And so it really is up to the individual teacher or school district that decides to use it. It is a methodology that typically, as far as I've ever seen, not only meets but exceeds any curriculum guidelines that are out there, because it actually develops the proficiency that we want kids to experience very early in their language acquisition process.
So if the teacher themselves, so I just want to clarify, a teacher themselves, if they're interested in using this program, would they contact you or like your team to come do training for them, or do they contact the school to set that up?
That's a fantastic question. So that's my next slide, actually. So I will show you that right now. So in order to implement AIM, there is both a series of resources and also training. So in the resources, you get a box, and in that box, you get a program guide, which is an overview of the methodology. You get a teacher's guide with 85 lesson plans, fully scripted lessons. Everything's there to show you how to teach the words, how to contextualize them, how to teach all the activities, how to review, move kids forward. This is an example of some of the 85 lesson plans. We have entry routine, whole class activity, partner group activity, leaving routine for every single day. It's fully described and all scripted. We have the student books or partner group activities book with all the fully photocopiable activities for the students, big books in hard copy and digitally posters and image cards for all of the songs, the raps, the dances, assessment activities books as well. DELF-like tests that test language proficiency are also found in the new editions of the kits. And finally, our online portal, which houses all of the digital materials, all of the songs, the videos of the songs, the raps, the dances, the play, all the gestures. We have an e-reader of the story, read out loud with highlighted text. We have all of the projectable posters with the songs and raps as well. If you're interested, I can share the correlations with ministry guidelines. And as I mentioned, we have training, because AIM is a methodology that really does require training. And we have 5 different levels of training. The first is just get started with AIM. And this is what I'm doing for the Edmonton Public Schools right now. They've offered any teacher who would like to have training, they get 2 days of training plus a kit, the step 1 kit. And so that is what I'm doing throughout the fall. And as soon as the strike is over, I was supposed to do it in December. As soon as the strike is over, or January, sorry. As soon as the strike is over, I'll do the next 2-day workshop. And then we have other workshops after that. But one would start with just the level 1 workshop. You can get a couple of lessons and see what a full AIM class is like if you go to aimlanguagelearning.com, and I'm happy to share that with Alexandra. If you're interested, you can download these 2 free lessons, give it a try with a class. You'll see a full lesson with an AIM class that was filmed before they had any language instruction.
Wendy, we have another question.
Yes, of course.
I just wanted to know if the gestures are universal or does it change between person?
So she was wondering if the gestures are universal or if they change, I guess, from instructor to instructor, language to language.
Well, I developed the gestures, a lot of them with my students, in order to help. Well, together we came up with gestures that were as natural as possible. What gesture can I do that will quickly tell you what it means? Marche, cours, saute, aime, donne, prends, écoute, regarde, écrit, and so on. So with my students, I developed a lot. I also researched later on American Sign Language, La Langue des Signes du Québec, to see if anything would really, was very, very iconic or natural. And so in terms of AIM, they are universal for French. So any French teacher using AIM will use the AIM gestures to teach French. In terms of the gestures for Spanish, most of them are the same, but I had to modify somewhat for the verbs because they have yo that you have to conjugate in Spanish. There's no regularized stem, so I have yo, camino, so then I can just do camino, drop off the yo, because they don't often use the subject. So I have to make some changes there, but all of the basic gestures are the same across most of the languages. English, you probably noticed there was a little bit of difference there. Put in terms of instead of mais, and then we had to do take out instead of enlève, because we have to have out and take. Those are 2 different gestures that we want to make sure students say. The development of the gestures all comes down to what do the kids have to say, what the students have to say. Every gesture represents a sound and a meaning. So, it's in English, we have to have take and we have to have out. And we have to have out used in other contexts and take used in other contexts. So we needed those 2 gestures instead of just enlève. So those are some examples of some differences. Hope that helps. So we do have trainings if you are at all. I think you're just starting on your career of being a teacher, perhaps, or perhaps not. But if you are interested, we have our online Winter Institute coming up. We have our gesture practice course coming up, and we have our Winnipeg workshop in October. So you can always wait till then. That's a live in-person workshop too. So if you're interested, or perhaps talk to Dion LeBlanc or Megan Sénéchal, those are the 2 representatives. If you're from Edmonton Public Schools, you could speak to them about the training that's coming up. Hopefully the end of January or in February, whenever the strike ends. So.
Okay, wonderful. So Wendy, it's the end of the class, so I'm going to release the prisoners. But I think Alex, who has another question, if you don't mind hanging around. Thank you so much, everybody. Can we give her Wendy a round of applause?
For inviting me.
Okay, hi, Wendy. I just want to ask you something first.
Yes. I'm so sorry, it's a little bit noisy. I can't quite hear.
Sorry, how about now? Better?
We'll try.
Okay. Okay, so with your AIM program,
yes.
I'm just curious, have you experienced having any deaf or hard of hearing students in that program specifically?
Sorry, have I had deaf students in the program?
Yes.
I have not, but I do know teachers who have, and I don't have a lot of detail, and I have had blind students, but I haven't personally had any deaf students myself, but I have known teachers who've had some. So yeah, I can't speak from personal experience. So of course the gestures aren't specifically sign, but again, English students are learning a new language, which is French too. So like the signing students would learn a slightly new language as well. But again, you know, they're not speaking French, but are hearing French, but they are visualizing the words that we're using. So yeah, if you are interested, please do join our AIM forum.
Sorry, I had just noticed that with like all together in your presentation, a lot of the gestures and things were more focused on, of course, sound or like audio or like the oral approach kind of. Is that, sorry, I just want to clarify. So does your program, does it provide anything that focuses just on like reading and writing specifically, or is it kind of tied back to like the verbal communication?
Oh, as you can see, those stories that the children wrote, AIM is a literacy approach and an arts-based approach. So we do have a lot of reading and writing involved with AIM. So, so the students are reading the stories, the story for the kit, and then we have a lot of scaffolded language manipulation activities right out to the story retellings and story extensions that the students write. We write together as a class with shared reading, and guided reading, and of course, then the students write in partners. So we do a lot of writing. If you're interested in hearing from teachers who have worked with students who are deaf, you could join our Parler avec Pauline AIM forum and put out a question to teachers, because we've got, I think, oh my goodness, about 2,300 AIM teachers all over the world who are on that forum. And I would think that someone probably could let you know about their experience there, if you would like to hear from a teacher's personal experience.
Yeah, I would love to know about their experience, and how that kind of connects with the AIM, because I think that this program could really benefit deaf students, and I think I'd be really interested in chatting with them, so that'd be great.
Nice. Oh, that's lovely. Yes, so do join. It's called Parler avec Pauline. And I'm happy to send that to Alexandra as well, that information.
That'd be great.
Good.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining and for your questions. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Wendy. Sorry. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us and giving us the presentation. I think that everybody had a lot of fun. Is it possible for you to share with me this presentation, and I know that you've been recording, so if you can pass me that link once you have it so that I can share it with the students.
Of course, my pleasure. And if anyone has any questions afterwards, don't hesitate. You have my email, they can write to me. It's my pleasure to answer any questions they might have.
Sounds good. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye, Alexandra.